So I'm here with Marvin Elkind. Marvin Elkind has been a driver for Muhammed Ali. He's been a driver for Jimmy Hoffa. His exploits as affiliated with the Teamsters and the mob, and also his work as an informant, has brought down several criminal organizations. He has withstood and endured and come out successful in cross-examinations, withering cross-examinations by the great David Humphreys, the Beast of the North, as he's called in the United States, one of the best criminal defense attorneys there's ever been. And Mr. Elkind has withstood his onslaught. And so I wish to speak with Mr. Elkind about his life, about what we can learn from it as criminal defense attorneys, especially the Georgetown defenders who are just up and coming, getting ready to go out into the world as criminal defense lawyers. And I thought that Mr. Elkind has some very important lessons to teach. And so I wanted to give him this opportunity. We're going to chat for a few hours about his life, about some of the lessons we can learn from it, and some of the techniques Mr. Elkind has used to suss out people's motivations, to see how they're feeling in the moment, and to watch for an opening and make a punch, which is exactly what's required by trial lawyers of any kind in court. So, Mr. Elkind, I'm happy to have you with me.
Thank you.
Could you start, Mr. Elkind, by telling us a little bit about who you are and how you got started early in life, how you grew up?
Well, I grew up with a very bad relationship with my stepfather, and when I was 9 years old, he got me to become a ward of Children's Aid, and I got put in a foster home with an Italian family from Sicily called Pasquale. The old lady was very tough. Her sons were all members of the mafia, and she wanted me while I lived there to go by their name, Pasquale, and she said Marvin Pasquale doesn't sound right, so they changed it to Mario. So while I was there, my name became Mario Pasquale. And then I got involved in boxing, and when I moved to New York, I got a job as a busboy at the Copacabana, where I became very friendly with different people. And one group that used to come in there all the time was a guy called Tony Salerno, Frankie Carbo, Linky Palermo, and Tony Provenzano, who were all members of the Teamsters and were associates of Mr. Hoffa. When they came there, people knew who they were, and waiters and busboys were scared to serve them because they used to scare them. I knew they were just having fun, and they weren't going to do anything. They liked scaring people, and they were good tippers. Mm-hmm. When other people ran away from them, I ran to them. I took good care of them, and they tipped me well.
You were able to tell that they didn't mean any harm by how they were acting.
I knew that they were just enjoying themselves. They had no reason to cause trouble outside of the fact of having fun themselves. So one day, Tony Salerno, who was the liaison between the mafia and the Teamsters, called me over to his table. And it went like this. He said, "Hey, little Jew boy, get over here." I went over and I said, "Yes, Mr. Salerno." He says, "Friday," this was a Wednesday, "Friday's your last day here." I says, "Why? I'm trying so hard to do a good job." He says, "As of Monday, you're going to be the driver for Mr. Jimmy Hoffa." Now, I didn't know Mr. Jimmy Hoffa. I heard a lot about him, and the idea of it scared me. So I said, "I don't want to be Jimmy Hoffa's driver." He says, "Nobody's asking you. Remember, Saturday we're picking you up, and we're taking you out to buy some clothes and some other stuff. And then we're going to take you and show you where to get the car and pick Mr. Hoffa up. Mr. Hoffa spends weekends in Detroit with his wife and family. He spends Monday to Friday in New York running the union, and then the weekends he goes back to his family in Detroit. On Saturday, they picked me up, and they took me out to a menswear store, and they bought me some sport jackets, some slacks, and some sports shirts. And they took me to a jewelry store, and they got me a gold chain. Mr. Hoffa's drivers were not allowed to wear shirts and ties. You had to wear a sports shirt so the gold chain would show. That showed you were a slave.
The slave?
Right.
Right.
So then they took me and showed me where I would get the car. It was a beautiful black Cadillac. Sunday, I was in my room, and I got very scared about the whole idea. So I called my mother in Toronto. I was in New York. I asked her if I could come home. I have this job starting on Monday. I'm scared to take it. She said, you can't come home because your stepfather doesn't want you. So you can't come here. And people will think that you were too scared to do things on your own, so you can't come back. So on Monday, I picked up the car, and I drove to LaGuardia, where I knew Mr. Hoffa's plane was coming in from Detroit. I went where I saw Mr. Hoffa get off the plane. I drove over, and I got out of the car. I opened up the back door, and I said, good morning, Mr. Hoffa. He says, are you Marvin? I goes, yes, sir. He says, very good start. Remember, it's Mr. Hoffa or sir. Nothing else but Mr. Hoffa or sir. That's a very good start. He got in the back of the car, and he said, I want you to drive over there. Pulled me to a spot. Two guys came out and got into the back of the car. Mr. Hoffa said, now, Marvin, turn off the car and turn around. I turned it around, and both these guys opened up their jackets to show me that they were carrying guns. He says, now, Marvin, there are rules and there are cardinal rules. You break a rule, these guys will beat the heck out of you. The rule is this: I must never be kept waiting. I don't want to hear a rainstorm, thunderstorm. I don't want to hear anything. I must never be kept waiting. After you pick me up, if circumstances make us late, that's okay. But I must never be kept waiting. Now, whatever you hear in this car stays in this car. If you don't, that's a cardinal rule, and you won't be around the next morning. And then we started working, and I started working for him. And they moved me into the Lowe's Midtown Hotel, where Mr. Hoffa had an apartment. Each of the bodyguards had a room, and I got a room there. And that's where we lived. And every day, I would take the car out. I used to get it checked for bugs to make sure nobody had wired the car.
How'd you check it?
A police officer came with a machine. I paid him, and he checked it. The car had to be clean. It didn't matter if it was pouring outside. That car had to be washed. I picked up Mr. Hoffa, and we would start our way, and we would go and we would do our work.
What kind of conversations did you pick up while you were driving him around? What kind of people were coming in and out of that car?
Mr. Hoffa was busy organizing groups, getting into the Teamsters Union so he could run strikes whenever he felt like it. He had big businessmen do what he wanted, or he would cause a strike in their business, and that way it gave him a lot of power.
Were you ever in any position where you feared for Mr. Hoffa's safety and you had to intervene because someone was after him?
Mr. Hoffa when I worked for him, sent me to Ecuador.
Mm.
There was a school in Ecuador for drivers and bodyguards. They didn't teach you how to fight or how to drive, but how to notice things, how to look out for things. And Mr. Hoffa had a meeting set with Albert Anastasia, who was the enforcer for Murder Incorporated, a very evil man. The meeting was set in Manhattan at Salerno's barber shop, a big barber shop with over 20 chairs. And the deal was that they were going to have the meeting sitting next to each other getting their haircut. When we got to the barber shop, I said to Mr. Hoffa, I don't like what I see. He says, what's bothering you, Marvin? I said, there's a station wagon there. I've never seen it before. There's a car down there I've never seen before. I'm not happy. He says, well, we sent you to school. What do you think? He says, I think he should not go in. He says, drive in the parking lot and see if Anastasia's car is there. I did, and I saw Anastasia's car. He says, phone the barber shop and tell them. Now, we didn't have cell phones in those days, but I had a phone in the car, and I had a big aerial on the trunk. So I had a phone in the car. I called the barber shop, and I got Albert Anastasia on the phone. Says, Mr. Anastasia, this is Marvin, Mr. Hoffa's driver. Mr. Hoffa is not coming in. It doesn't look good. He thinks that the meeting should be canceled and you should leave. He says, whose idea was that? Because that was mine. He said to me, I don't need any dirty little Jew who went to the Italians and the Italians gave back to the Jews to tell me what to do. The prophet doesn't want to come in and listen to him. I'm staying. A little while later, 4 guys entered the barber shop. 2 of them pumped 8 bullets into the back of the chair where Anastasia was and killed them. And 2 of them pumped 8 bullets into the empty chair where they thought Mr. Hoffa was, but he wasn't there. The next day, the paper read, Hoffa's driver outwits hitmen.
And that would be the second headline that had you outwitting somebody else, wouldn't it?
No.
Which how many people have you outwitted in the course of your career, Marvin?
Quite a few. Now, one of the big things that happened was when I came back to Canada, I got a job driving the greatest con man that Canada ever had, Neil Cameron Proverbs. And he was a tremendous con man. And one person that he conned out of a lot of money was a wealthy Jewish man in the steel business called Joe Tenenbaum, whose son-in-law was the Solicitor General of Canada. So when the trial came up against Neil Proverbs, I was called as a witness for the Crown. And Neil Proverbs had a lawyer, and he was defending him. And then during the trial, the judge was Hugh Locke. A man stands up, and he was wearing a lawyer's gown. And he said, Your Honor, my name is Humphreys, and I'm going to be cross-examining Mr. Elkind myself on his affidavits. He said, I'd like a little time to study his affidavits. The judge said, well, it's post-lunch. We'll break for lunch. We'll start after lunch. He said, Mr. Elkind, remember you're under oath. You must not discuss this. On my way out of the courtroom, Dave Humphreys made his first big mistake. He said to me, Marvin, don't take it personal, but I'm going to give you a beating in court but you never got in the ring. I'm going to cut you into small little pieces. I just want you to know that. I went down the street to the Sheraton Center. I had a couple of vodka martinis and a chicken sandwich. And on my way back, I ran into a lawyer called Doug Lissaman. Lissaman says to me, the words are around that we're going to be cross-examined by Humphreys. I goes, yes. He goes, Marvin, Humphreys doesn't care about the case. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about Proverbs. He's just going to make a fool of you. He's going to ask you a bunch of questions about things you did, and he's going to have statements in papers behind his back. He catches you in one lie, you're finished. People know who you are anyway. Remember, if he catches you in a lie, you're all through. You have to tell the truth because he's going to have statements and paper behind his back. We've gone into court, and Humphrey says to me, in such and such a year, did you do this? I said, yes, I did. He said, and did you do this in such a year? I said, yes, I did. He says, did you do this with a man called Baldy Shard? I said, yes, I did. He said, did you do this for a man called Roy Pasquale? Because that was me. He was becoming very frustrated. He says, now, did you tell lies to Mill Proverbs to get money from him? I goes, yes, I did. He says, how did you feel when you were telling these lies to Neil Proverbs? I says, I felt terrific. He says, why? I says, because I was drunk. He says, so you're saying the devil made you do it? I said, well, your client bought me the drinks. You want to call him the devil? That's up to you. The courtroom burst out laughing. Now I was feeling terrific. And he's asking me questions. And he takes a pen out of his pocket and he points at me. He says, for what you did and the things you did, are you a son of a bitch? I said, repeat that, please, sir. He says, are you a son of a bitch? He says, who are you pointing the pen at, you or me? And the person just burst up laughing.
Wow.
After that, I was enjoying it very much. I was having a great time. The next day, the paper said, Humphreys outwitted and beat to the punch by quick-talking Marvin Elkind.
Rapid-speaking Elkins beats Humphreys to the punch every time.
I said, rapid-speaking Elkind beats Humphreys to the punch every time. Now,
well, I'll be damned.
About a year later, there was a dinner in downtown Toronto to honor the Attorney General of the province of Ontario, Roy McMurtry. People bought tables. One man that bought a table was a lawyer called Christoph Beer-Basinski, and invited me to be his guest. I get to the dinner. I go to the table I'm invited to, and who's one of the guests at the tables? Humphreys.
Wow.
We have somebody said, we're not talking to each other. Somebody says, why don't you two guys repeat what happened in court that time? We did. Before we knew it, everybody was around us, and we're doing the story, and they're laughing their heads off. Murphy came over, he was laughing his head off. And Humphreys and I then got invited to a lot of dinners, and we repeated it. They called it the Dave and Marv Show.
That is awesome.
And we became good friends. Before he died, he told his son, make sure that Marvin comes to the funeral.
Oh.
Now, later on, Humphreys became a judge. I was on a beef, and my lawyer, Harvey Salem, had made arrangements for me to get a remand. We get to the courthouse, all the judges were busy. They had to find a judge that had time to see me, to give me the remand. The only judge that had time available was Humphreys. We go into the courtroom, and Salem tells Humphreys, we're here for the remand. He says, well, is Mr. Elkind in custody? He goes, no, he's not. Well, we have to put Mr. Elkind in custody. So he says, my lawyer says, Your Honor, I made arrangements with your good friend, Henry Bull, who was the chief crown attorney, that Marvin Elkind would be here for a remand and not to be in custody. So Humphrey says, in that case, we'll let it go just like that. And that's what happened.
So you were called to a lot of, it sounds like these were like bar association. In the U.S. we have like the American Bar Association. It sounds like these were like dinners with the Canadian Bar Association. Is that pretty accurate? When you and
exactly.
Okay. And so they would gather around while you repeated this cross-examination that happened in court, and they would invite you to more and more dinners the more you did the show.
Exactly, and people got a big laugh out of it, and Dave and I were actually enjoying ourselves.
Have you been cross-examined by anybody else?
Yes, by many lawyers.
Can you share a little bit about what that was like? Could you tell a few war stories about when you were cross-examined by other lawyers?
I was always relaxed, and I found out if I would tell jokes, I could get the courtroom laughing and being on my side, and that's what I did, and it worked very well.
Did you ever fall victim to any tactics defense attorneys would throw at you? For instance, I know that prosecutors are very good about preparing witnesses, and especially that lawyer that day, by the last name of Listman, you said, prepared you in advance and told you Humphrey's secret, which is what every defense lawyer knows. If you can catch a witness in a lie, it only takes one, and then you've got him. He prepared you very well for that. He gave you the information you needed to take Humphreys down. Did you get that same level of preparation every time you entered a case on the side of the Crown or the government?
I didn't always get the information because I wouldn't run into the right person, but I knew that I must not be caught in a lie. So I made sure it didn't matter what it was, that they would be ready for me if I lied. They would have a written statement contradicting it. So whatever I did, it didn't matter. I told the truth, and I always came out on top.
Would you have any advice for either for witnesses in criminal cases or for criminal defense attorneys to try to catch somebody off guard? It sounds like it would be tough to do that to you, but I'm sure you've watched a fair share of cross-examinations as well. Have you seen other witnesses fall apart to some tactic that you hadn't thought of before or that struck you?
I've seen witnesses fall apart because they didn't admit to something, and then it was proven by statements that they were lying, and then they were finished. So I always made sure that it didn't matter who was cross-examining me. I never told a lie. I always admitted to what I had done previously, and I made up my mind to make jokes in court and get the courtroom laughing with me, not against me, but with me.
So you could say you know how to work a room then.
I worked the room very well.
No doubt you had to. No doubt the life that you've led has given you or sharpened in some way that skill. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I had situations where the police made me a informant, and I wore a wire. And one thing I knew was that I had to make sure nobody found that wire on me. Now, they sent me all over. I worked for the Ontario Provincial Police, and I had a handler by the name of Robinson, and he would loan me out to different forces. I worked for the RCMP, the Metro Police, the FBI, Scotland Yard, Mexican Federales, and the Ecuador Police. Wow. Now, there was one case we were doing in Mexico for the FBI and the Mexican Federales. I became friends with the Mexican drug dealers, that they wanted me to get the information on, and we were socializing, having a good time. Finally, there was time for the meeting, and they were going to discuss how they were going to send drugs from Mexico to the United States. Before the meeting, the FBI agent said to me, "Marvin, we were bringing in the top wireman from Washington for the FBI. He'll be well wired up, so we'll handle everything." The superintendent from the federales, his name was Pepe, says, "Are you crazy? You can't wear a wire. They'll pat him down, they'll find the wire, and they'll kill him right away." He says, "But they trust him." He says, "They don't trust themselves. They'll find it and they'll kill him." He says, "He's not going to wear a wire. This is Mexico. I'm calling the shots." He says, "Marvin, when you have the meeting, concentrate, concentrate, concentrate. Remember everything, but you're not going to wear a wire." So I went into the meeting. They greeted me, and they hugged me, and "How you doing?" And I knew when they were hugging me, they were patting me down. But I wasn't worried because I wasn't wearing a wire. They said, "Marvin, we're going to have the meeting now." I said, "Fine." He says, "You'll love the meeting." I said, "Why?" He says, "We're having it in the sauna." My heart almost fell right out of my mouth.
Wow.
It was a very close call.
Yeah, that was a close call. Did you? So you sat in on that meeting, and
I sat in on the meeting.
Yeah.
I remembered everything. And when the boats were going across with the drugs, they were stopped, and the president of Mexico got on TV and said the informant that gave us all the information was my man. He had never met me before, but he took credit for it. And the case went down fantastic.
That must have been a real honor to get the shout out from the president of a country.
Now, it came time to leaving Mexico. They called me into the federal offices, and they said, "The FBI and I were paying you $10,000. It was an awful lot of money." Said, "The RCMP are coming from Canada. Take your cross. And you cross the border into Canada, they're going to give you the money." Then the receptionist says, "Mr. Elkind, you want it on the phone." I get on the phone, and it was the president of Mexico.
Wow.
He says, "Mr. Elkind, you've done a great service for your country of Canada, for the United States, and my country of Mexico. Take this number down. It's a private number. Even when I'm not president, you can get me. If you ever need me, you let me know. Anything I can do for you, I will. You're a very brave man, Mr. Elkind." I said, "Mr. President, this peasant doesn't feel right, somebody of your great station calling me Mr. Please call me Marvin." He laughed and said, "Okay." And then the RCMP came and picked me up and took me back to Canada, and I got my money.
Wow. That is excellent. So you got to talk on the phone with the president of Mexico. How did it feel? How did it feel, the life that you'd led up to that point, and then now you're talking with the president of Mexico?
I was trembling for everything I had been through. Now, while I was working for the Interior Provincial Police, the deputy commissioner, Livingstone, told my handler, he says, "Marvin is troubled. He's not sure who he is. We want to send him to a psychiatrist to straighten him out, but we don't want to send him to our psychiatrist. Get him a private psychiatrist." So they got me a psychiatrist, a young Jewish boy who had his office on Young Street. I went to his office, and I came in, and I started to tell him my life story. He says, "You're crazy." I said, "Well, Doc, why do you think I'm here?" So he opened up the door, and he told his secretary, he says, "Call the police. This man is hallucinating, and he's nuts. Make sure you get him out of here." So when I came back, they decided to send me to their psychiatrist, who I'm still in touch with. His name is Peter Collins, Dr. Peter Collins. He's the chief psychiatrist for the Ontario Provincial Police. He travels to Afghanistan and he told me this: I can't teach you how not to be scared. You're going to have to be scared. But what to do is this: when you're having these meetings, tell jokes to yourself. But to yourself, you start telling jokes to yourself, you start getting laughing. They won't notice you're scared. They notice you're scared, they'll know there's something wrong. You'll have to be scared. I can't teach you how not to be scared, but I can teach you how to hide it. And that's what happened. And we're still friends today. I'm still in touch with him.
Did you find that his insight, I'm sure that went a long way in several of the operations you were involved in, being known, like, not as having to get rid of the fear, but being able to hide it. I'm sure that really helped.
I had one case where the wire was on my back and it fell. I grabbed my back and I said, the pain from one of my knockdowns from my fight is bothering me. I'm going to go into the washroom. I did. I took the wire off and I hid it so they wouldn't find it. Now, another time, I was at a meeting with some people and they were discussing a murder they wanted to do. It was at a bakery in Toronto. One of the guys says, I got to ask you a question. I've heard a lot about you. Are you wired for sound? I says, what are you talking about? He says, are you being wired? Just then, a car pulled up. Listening in on the conversation was my handler, Robinson. He said, Marvin Elkind, you're under arrest.
Wow.
They took me away. So I said, what are we going to do now? He says, we're going to go to a medical store and I'm going to buy you a back brace. And the next time they mention you being wired, you show them the back brace. And that way they will not suspect you. The next day I met with these guys and they started talking about being wired. I stood up and I said, I'm sick of this. This has got me upset. Everybody knows I hurt my back from when I falls them by. I opened up my pants and there was the back brace. And they started to laugh. And they said, you can't take a joke. We're just kidding you. We know you wouldn't be wired.
Little did they know.
And little did they know.
So it sounds like you've had your fair share of really close calls.
I did 260 cases.
Wow.
260 as an agent informant. Now, the difference between an agent informant and an informant is this. An informant finds out things and he gives it to the police. The agent works the cases undercover, working for the police. And I did 260 cases, 259 successful. There was one guy I couldn't get in Windsor. They thought he was a drug dealer. Either they were wrong or he was too smart for us. But I couldn't get him. I used to get him to try and talk about drugs. And he used to say, what do you want to talk about drugs for? It's against the law. Let me sell you real estate. We're going to make a lot of money. We never got that guy. The other 259 all led to these guys getting arrested and prosecuted and imprisoned.
Wow, that's a very impressive record. Only one problem case there. Do you have any other stories about like close calls that you've been in?
I had a close call where I worked on the Jamaican posse, and one day I was in my living room watching television on a Sunday night, and my wife said, somebody here to see you. I came downstairs. There were two members of the Jamaican posse there. They had a driver outside. We found out later it was a female. They said, Marvin, we've had a lot of trouble with the police, and it all started when we became friends with you. We want to go for a drive and talk about it. I knew if I had gone out and got in that car with them, I'd never get out alive.
Right.
So I said, I'm not going. I've got two daughters. One wasn't living at home at the time. One was. I started fighting with them. I backed up against the wall, and I started throwing punches. And my daughter called the police. and said that my father has got people here that want to kill him. The police came, and one of the members of the Jamaican posse said, "Officers, this is just an argument between friends." The cop said, "Is that true?" I said, "No, they're here to kill me." They didn't arrest them, but they made them leave the house. My car was on the driveway. My tires were slashed. The next day, the OPP sent forensic. They checked it out, and it was a bayonet that slashed the tire. I had a bayonet in the car. They were going to use it on me.
After you had called the police, then brought people back the next day to see exactly what it is they were going to do to you and what they had done to your tires, did anything happen to those individuals? Were they arrested?
No.
Were they apprehended? No.
No, they were.
Wow.
They were followed and later on caught on different cases.
I was thinking, I'm sure that you have stories where you had to do a really expert job at trying to figure out what people thought about you. Someone's not going to tell you automatically whether they think that you might be some kind of a snitch. They might give subtle signs that you can kind of pick up on. Do you have any stories like that where you've used some skills to try to suss out people's motivations?
What I did was I acted like I was strictly for them and told jokes to myself and did a lot of laughing and made everybody feel comfortable.
And once they got talking about what the enterprise was and they saw that you were just one of the guys, you were just talking, they didn't have any second thoughts about you?
No.
Are there any insights you can give as to how people can use that in their everyday lives? I think that people worry, whether they're a trial lawyer who's dealing with a very difficult witness or something similar. People worry about their ability to figure that out on the spot. It seems like you're a pro at that.
I was a pro at controlling fear, even though I was scared, and I was always scared. I always acted like I wasn't, and that was the big secret. The idea is to disguise your fears. Don't let people know you're scared. If they feel you're not scared, they feel you're not doing anything against them.
Can you speak a little bit about when you started becoming an informant, what it was like when you first stepped into that role, and what was there a learning curve? Were you naturally good at it? Can you just give us a background on that?
When I testified against Proverbs, the police were very impressed at the job I did, and they took a background check, and they found out that I had mafia connections from when I lived in foster homes. So they used me as an informant. Now, I had cases where I would hear things going on. There was one case where this female was running a business where people would come to plazas and she would take their pictures and put them on plaques, and she was running a stolen car ring. She was arranging the theft of cars, expensive cars, and sending them out of the country. And I heard about it, and we became friendly, she and I, and she introduced me to a friend of hers who became so confident in me. He told me everything that they were doing, and it led to a lot of cars being found and a lot of arrests. Now, she became very friendly with me, and this guy became very friendly with me, and he opened up certain things to me. Now, what the police did was, there are certain people, they let them know that if they were my friends, they would be all right. So we go to a lot of places like boxing matches. I would be with people that were real tough guys who felt secure with me because they were told if they were my friends, they would be all right. And that's the way they worked it.
Do you have any stories about your time with Mr. Hoffa in terms of your personal conversations with him and kind of how he treated you?
Mr. Hoffa never spoke to me. He yelled. If I would come to a stop, he would yell, "Why did you stop? Why did you do this? Why did you do that?" He was always yelling at me. Don Vito Genovese, the head don in New York, took a strong liking to me. He had a reputation of being a very dangerous man, but he acted to me like he was my grandfather. And he used to say to him in the car, "Jimmy, why are you yelling at the boy? Marvin's such a good boy. Don't yell at the boy." Now, one day, we're driving, and in the back of the car was Mr. Hoffa and Don Vito. This was in Manhattan. As we're driving, Don Vito says to Mr. Hoffa, "The manufacturer that makes sportswear, he's cooperating with us?" He goes, "No, he's not." He says, "Then he got to go." The next day, they found the guy dead. So I figured out, I'll make sure that whatever happens, this old guy likes me. Don Vito Genovese treated me like he was my grandfather. Now, Mr. Hoffa was always yelling at me. That's the way he treated me.
I remember that you told the story earlier about having saved his life, where they had shot the barber.
Now, after that happened,
mm-hmm.
I went to Mr. Hoffa, and I feel very proud of myself. So I said, "Mr. Hoffa, that was a great thing I did, wasn't it?" He says, "What are you talking about? What did you do?" He says, "I didn't let you go into the barber shop." It was, "Marvin, that's your job. All you did was your job. Your job was to keep me safe. That's why we sent you to that school in Ecuador. That's why we sent you there." Now, the guy in Ecuador, his name was Rafael Janowitzer. He lived in Ecuador, and he was selling drugs from Ecuador to Canada and the United States. They wanted to find out who his mules were, who he was sending across. So I made arrangements to go to Ecuador and spend some time with him. He moved me into his apartment. I lived with him. We made a deal that if one of us would be out, the other one, when he came home, would phone a little beforehand in case the guy had somebody there abroad or something. I searched his apartment. In a wall, I found the names and addresses of his mules. I copied them down on a bunch of business cards of his that I found on the back, and I kept them in my wallet. And I kept my wallet with me all the time, even when I slept. So when I came back to Canada, I gave them over to the OPP, and they were able to catch any of the people smuggling drugs because I had their names.
You'll use whatever you have on hand, and you're definitely someone who looks for opportunities and takes opportunities. You didn't have paper on you. You didn't have anything to write on, so you just grabbed his business cards and you just used those.
Exactly.
I remember hearing a story where you'd convinced a secretary to let you into somebody's office.
Now, here's what happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When I came back to Canada, I was given the job to work for the head of the Teamsters in Canada, Tommy Corrigan. I went to Tommy Corrigan, and I said, "I'll be working here now for you." He goes, "Yes." I thought I would be getting a promotion. I said, "What will I be doing?" He said, "What do you mean, what will you be doing?" "You'll be driving and running errands. That's what you're good at. That's what you're going to be doing. You'll be doing that." Now, here's what happened. When Tommy Corrigan came from the States, when we were going back to New York to visit his family, his office door was always locked. There was only 2 keys to it, him and his secretary. Now, my daughter was getting married. I didn't have any money to make the wedding. I get a phone call from a guy from Montreal by the name of Irving Cott. He says, "You don't know me, and I don't know you, but I've heard about you. I'm going to mail you $1,000. Buy a return ticket and come to Montreal and come to my office and meet me. I've got a proposition for you." I went down and I met him in his office in the Sheraton Center in Montreal. Beautiful offices with a dining room and a kitchen. He says, I'm in a business deal with Tommy Corrigan. I says, that's who I've heard. He says, there's papers in his office that would help me out in that business deal. I want you to get me copies of those papers and get them to me. I says, I can't do that. I work for the man. He says, I'll pay you $10,000. I said, you got a deal. Now, I come back to Toronto, and Tommy Corrigan tells me he's going in a few days to New York. I have to drive him to the airport. I drive him to the airport, and I left him off, and I come back, and I said to his secretary, I said, Tommy left some papers in his office he was supposed to bring to New York. He wants me to find them. He says, okay, I'll open the door for you. Come and see me when you're left. I searched the office. I found the papers. I took them to a copy shop, not a place where one copier, a machine shop, and they made copies of them. And I brought the originals back, and I had the others. And I went to Montreal, met with Irving Cotton, gave him the papers, and he gave me the money. On the way back, my heart was pumping. I got home. I gave the money to my wife. I said, put this away. This is for the wedding. We're going to make the wedding. And we had it a because of my Teamster connections, I got the limousines for nothing and the flowers for nothing. We made the wedding at the Sutton Place Hotel at the room at the top. It was a fantastic, and they gave me a great deal because of who I was. So it was a fantastic wedding. Now, Tommy Corrigan at one time put a hit on his brother. So one day he comes to me, this is about a year later, he says, I found out who double-crossed me and how Cott was able to get a hold of some papers. I says, who was the son of a bitch? Let's get him. He says, it was you, you dirty bastard. You were the one that did it. And one day you're going to feel a piece against the back of your head. When it goes off, think of me. And if somebody else would say that to you, you would slough it off. When a guy puts a hit in his own brother, you know that this is a guy that might do it. Now, Tommy Corrigan was married to the daughter of Don Vito Genovese. And he had working in his office a gorgeous girl. She was gorgeous. And he kept her in an apartment in the Colonnade. So now I said to myself, I got to get him before he gets me. So what am I going to do? So I thought about it. So I went to New York to get a visit with Don Vito Genovese. Don Vito came out, he took his hand out to shake my hand. I took his hand and then I kissed it. I says, Patron. Patron is a word for master in Italian. It shows high respect. I says, Patron, I'm here with a broken heart. I hate to be here, but I have such respect for you. And I think so great of you, I have to tell you the truth. Tommy is cheating on your daughter. Now, these old Italian guys, it didn't matter what they did, but their daughters were sacred to them. He says, are you certain, Marvin? He says, Patron, my heart is breaking having to come here. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't true. He says, I'm sending somebody back to Toronto. I want you to prove it. We went and we checked out the Colonnade, and the guy saw that Tommy was keeping this apartment with this girl. It didn't take long, and Corrigan was done away with.
That is cool. So if I'm understanding this right, this guy who was giving you trouble had a secretary that was attractive, and that you used that fact to convince the Don that this was that he was cheating on on his daughter. Is that right?
Exactly.
Wow. Wow. That's tremendous, Marvin. I don't know how to react to that. That's just tremendous. You saw you saw an opportunity. You saw a set.
I made the opportunity.
You made the opportunity. That was all you. That was all you. And you took this guy out of play who had threatened your life.
Exactly. He was gone. I was still here. He was gone.
Wow, that is really excellent. And you know what? You know what's funny? You did it without throwing a punch. You did it without threatening him. You did it without showing up with a gun. You did that just with your intellect, Marvin. That is really impressive that you're able to defend yourself in that way. That is really excellent.
I drove Rocky Marciano.
Oh, did you?
I traveled all over Canada with George Civello, where George would talk to kids about not being on drugs. Now, George and I became very close. What happened was one day, twice we faced death. What happened was we were flying in a private plane to Edmonton, to the airport. It was a 4-seater. In the front was our pilot and the guide. In the back was me and George. We ran into a thunderstorm that was horrendous. The pilot said, "Hang on and pray. I've lost air contact and I've lost visibility. I'm going in for a crash landing." George turns to me and he says, "Marvin, what are we going to do? Our friend Rocky Marciano got killed in a private plane crash. What are we going to do?" I said, "Let's ask Rocky." He says, "How?" He says, "There he is now. He's got wings." So it got everybody laughing. And we landed safely. Now, another time, we were in Saskatchewan, and George was there to speak to a hockey school called Notre Dame to the kids about not being on drugs. When George spoke to the kids, he tore himself in half because he wouldn't just talk to them. He would tell them what happened to his sons. We're with a camera crew, and we get to a field, and they said, "We made a wrong turn. The school is around the other end. I'm going to turn around and take us to the school." It was slightly snowing. George says, "It's such a nice, cool day. Marvin and I will take a walk across and meet you there." I said, "There's one mistake. Marvin is staying with the camera crew. He's not walking." George gets out of the car, opens up the back door, and pulls me out and says, "You'll love the walk." Now, there were signs up that kids had taken down that we didn't know about, said quicksand. And you couldn't see it because of the snow falling. George and I are walking. All of a sudden, George disappears. I look down, George had fallen through the ground. I go to help him up, and I go through the ground. Now, George was like this. If he had any control, he was all right. He said, "Hang on to me, I'll get us out of this." We were about 15 minutes away from dry land. We had to go down, crawl underneath the ground, get up and get air, go down, crawl under the ground, get up and get air. It took us 2 hours to get there. The camera crew, instead of being there to help us, were taking pictures. We've got pictures of it. And we got out of it.
Wow. So wow, that is impressive. So you hung on to this guy, And when you say you had to go down to ground level, you mean when the quicksand settled out and there was solid ground under you?
That's right. We went.
Wow.
We had a crawl with our heads underground.
Wow.
Then we came up for air. And we went
no
down
one,
again.
no one handed you anything. No one handed you like one of those.
Nobody
mic
did a
booms?
thing. They were just taking pictures.
Wow. I had read somewhere that you had driven somewhere with Golda Meir or her daughter or something. But
no, here's what happened.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Here we go. Now, Golda Meir was in Toronto to speak, and my job was to drive her. She was driving at the biggest synagogue in Canada, which was actually the biggest in North America, called the Titanic. She was the speaker there, and I got hired as her driver to drive her from the synagogue to the home of Ray Wolf, who was chairman of the board of IGA stores. He was having a reception there afterwards. So after she was finished speaking, he lived on the bridle path. Now the bridle path is a gorgeous area with mansions with very poor lighting. So we get in the car, and Golda Meir is in the back with two Israeli bodyguards. I get into the car, I said, "Good evening, Madam Prime Minister." He says, "What is your name?" I says, "My name is Marvin, Madam Prime Minister." He says, "Marvin, you sound scared." I says, "I'm not scared, I'm terrified." Now, police officer comes over to me and says, "Marvin, you're not going to have an escort because we don't want to draw attention. Drive her right to the house." We got to the bridle path. I wasn't sure where I was going because of the poor lighting. I said to myself, "God, please don't let me make a mistake." And I got Golda Meir to the house, and it worked out well.
Wow, that really is impressive. So they didn't want to give you an entourage because they didn't want to draw attention.
They didn't want to draw attention, so they said there'll be no entourage. You're on your own.
And again, you were able to control your fear in that situation, despite being afraid. You were able to exercise some calm and do what you had to do.
And concentrate and get her to the right house.
Yes.
Ray Wolf, when I got there, invited me in, but I was driving then for the president of a large construction company, who was also the president of the Canadian Jewish Council in Canada. He told me if I'm invited into the house, not to go, so I refused the invitation.
That makes sense, out of respect.
I was following instructions.
I know that you have a very, very interesting story about how it is you came to drive for and become friends with Muhammad Ali.
Now, Muhammad Ali was like this. There was a boxing match in New York where George fought Floyd Patterson. It was a fantastic fight. As a matter of fact, it was made Fight of the Year. I sat right next to Sugar Ray Robinson at the fight. Now, in New York, we stood at a hotel called the Lowe's Midtown, which, when I worked for the Teamsters, we all lived there, and that's where Teamster headquarters was. Now, the great Joe Louis had a suite, and Muhammad wanted a suite there. He went to Irving Ungerman, who was George's manager, who was promoting the whole thing, and he asked him, he says, "I can't do anything. Go to Marvin. I got Muhammad a suite there." Now, at the fight, at the intermission, I decided to go across the road to the Lowe's Midtown to my room to get something. Muhammad decided to do the same thing. We wound up in the elevator together. So I said, Muhammad, I'm Marvin Elkind. I'm the one that got you to the suite. And I want you to know, anytime you're in Toronto and you need a driver, I'll be glad to drive you free of charge. Muhammad said to me, I don't need a free driver. I get drivers whenever I want them. I'm not interested in having you as my driver. And that was that. Now, a little while later on, there was a fight in Toronto, and Muhammad was a guest. He wasn't fighting, he was a guest. I walked into Maple Leaf Gardens ahead of time, and Muhammad was there with Bonini Brown. I walked over and he said, Marvin, I want to speak to you. He says, there's other people in the elevator, so I was putting on a show. I want you to know I was just kidding. I said, I want you to know I was just kidding too. And we became very dear friends. Anytime he was in Canada, anywhere, I was hired as a driver, and he gave me a bracelet for my 70th birthday, which I never take off. It's on my wrist. He gave me a gold bracelet. We became very close friends. Now, there was a dinner in Toronto honoring George Chevelle. They wanted to have a big crowd, so they invited Floyd Patterson, Yvonne Durrell, Ray Robinson, Joe Fraser. Everybody accepted, except Muhammad couldn't make it. So they asked me to phone. I got Muhammad on the phone, and his wife took the phone, and she said, if Marvin wants you to go, I want you to go. So in order to do me a favor, Muhammad came, and the dinner was a big success, standing room only, because Muhammad was there as a guest of honor.
Wow.
And we became very dear friends. I had a dinner at the Pickleball at the Atrium for Muhammad, which he came to, and it was a very big success. I spent a lot of the time with Muhammad at different things, and till the end, we were very, very close, dear friends.
He actually gave you a special bracelet as a present at one point.
He gave me a gold bracelet, which I always wear on my wrist.
24 hours a day.
24/7.
Out of his memory?
Out of his memory and out of admiration for what a great person he was. In my opinion, he was the second greatest heavyweight ever.
Who was the first, in your opinion?
A fantastic individual, a wonderful human being, and a great fighter. Now, I'll tell you the story. That was Joe Louis. Now, there was a show in Toronto, and guests of honor were Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano. Now, Rocky Marciano was a very dear friend, and he was a terrific guy, tremendously sociable, and a lot of fun, and a great guy to be with. But he had one thing. I had met a lot of big spenders in my day and very cheap people. Nobody as cheap as Rocky. It was like a sickness. He was the cheapest person I ever met. You could take Rocky for dinner and spend $1,000. Take him for lunch and pay $500. The next day, take him for breakfast. He still wouldn't pick up the bill. He was a very cheap guy. Now, I got a call from a clothing factory called Warren K. Cook, who are known as the most expensive and stylish tailors in Canada. They said, we understand you're driving Rocky Marciano and Joe Louis. We want to make each one of them a free suit so they could say they're wearing our clothes. what can you arrange? I said, well, on Sunday there's a sparring section, and George will be sparring. They'll be there. He said, we'll have the factory opened, and we'll hire a designer there to measure them. I make arrangements. Now it comes time to go, and Joe Louis says to me, Marvin, I'm not going. I got paid. George, by the way, at the time was fighting Ernie Terrell. That was the fight. He was fighting Ernie Terrell. So Joe Louis says, I'm not going. I got paid so much money to come here. I got the money. I didn't make a deal for a free suit. I'm not going. I said, Joe, you don't understand. This has nothing to do with that. This is an extra. He got mad. He said, I said, I'm not going. I said, all right. So I took Rocky. I got there. I introduced Rocky to the president of the company, and he says, where's Louis? I says, Louis wouldn't come. He didn't want a free suit. They show Rocky samples of clothes. He says, I'll take this one and I'll take this one. I call him aside. I says, Rock, they only offered to make you one suit. He says, yeah, but Joe didn't take his. So they made him the two suits.
Wow. So he got 2 custom suits for free that day.
Now, another time, I was invited to a dinner, and a guy by the name of Lou Miles heard that I was going to this dinner. He says, I want you to come down to my store. I'm going to make you a free suit for this dinner to go and say I made it for you. I mentioned it to George. I get to the store, George is there. George decided that he would get himself a free suit also. So besides making me one, George got 2 of them.
Wow. This suit company is really churning out free suits.
Right.
What I wanted to ask is that you've been around some real personalities, and you've got one yourself, by the way.
Thank you.
You've been around some really titanic figures, Muhammad Ali, Jimmy Hoffa. Before our interview, I actually was watching some of Jimmy Hoffa's testimony before Congress when he was being asked questions by Kennedy.
Now, Mr. Hoffa and Bobby Kennedy hated each other. It went well beyond business. They just hated one another. And sometimes Mr. Hoffa would get up and say, I'm leaving. This is before the hearing was over. Bobby Kennedy would say, you can't leave, we're not ready yet. Mr. Hoffa would turn around, I was always sitting behind him, and he would say, Marvin, bring the car around. And we would always leave.
Wow.
Bobby Kennedy hated Mr. Hoffa, and Mr. Hoffa hated Bobby Kennedy. It was well beyond business. It became personal.
What do you think it was between them? It was did Kennedy represent Hoffa's control over?
Kennedy tried to get. Mr. Hoffa was like this. He feared nothing, and he showed no respect at all for Bobby Kennedy. And Bobby Kennedy didn't like that. And Mr. Hoffa thought that Bobby Kennedy was a very arrogant person. So they just hated one another.
In terms of his personality, which was obviously very effective, and also Muhammad Ali's personality, what do you think it is that made those people so able to move a lot of people, where people would go out to see them, and where they were able to have a strong hold on people's attention and on their imagination? What was it about those 2 men, and also other personalities that you've driven around? What is it that makes people want to listen to them?
They were fantastic at their trade. They knew people wanted to be with them, and they knew how to handle the crowds. They knew how to make people respect them and want to like them. They knew how to handle people, and they were well sought after because they were such great athletes.
With Hoffa, do you think that his personality, which was really tenacious,
Mr. Hoffa had two passions in life that he loved. His family. He was a great family man. He loved his family, and he loved his union. And his union knew that he would do anything that he had to make conditions better for them. He was all for the union people. He was strictly for them. They came first before anybody.
When he made people feel like that they mattered, they stood by him.
They stood by him. They would do anything for him because they knew he would do anything for them. He was for them all the way. He would get them the best wages, the best conditions, the best of everything he could get for them, he did.
Is it true that at one point you drove Queen Beatrix?
Now, I drove Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands. She was here, and she came with her husband. His name was Albert. Now, she was staying at the King Edward Hotel, so they had to have a driver from the Teamsters to drive her around, because that was one of the rules of the hotel. King Edward were members of the Teamsters. Everybody that worked there was a member of the union. Now, before that, they gave me lessons how to talk to her. They said you would dress her as Her Royal Highness. They made me a blazer and slacks and gave me a special shirt and tie to wear when I drove her. I drove her around. Now, after it was over, I drove her. She was very easy to talk to, a very nice person. And they told me you do not speak to Her Royal Highness unless she speaks to you first. Albert was not of royal blood. I could talk to him whenever I wanted. Now, after she left, I got a phone call from the government. They want the outfit back. I says, you want the outfit back? It says, it was made for me. Who's it going to fit? He says, it doesn't matter. I said, I took it to the dry cleaners. He says, which one? I said, I can't remember. I never returned it.
Marvin, someone has written about you. There's a book out by Adrian Humphreys, The Weasel, A Double Life in the Mob. What was it like for someone to write a book about your exploits?
Adrian Humphreys was a wonderful guy. He told me, I'm going to give you one of my female staff to interview you. Just tell your life story exactly the way it was. Don't make any changes, good or bad. Tell it the way it was. Tell it what scared you, what didn't scare you, how you handled things, how you managed things. Now, I had a case when I was 11 years old. Two guys. Those days, there were a lot of corner grocery stores owned by Jewish people that always lived on top or back of the store. And they were open every day. On Sundays and during the summer, they used to take turns closing so that they could take their family to a place for a summer day. And these two guys, Les Irwin and Tommy McDermott, they were 14, I was 11. They would find out what storage would be left alone. They would take me with them. They used to break it open a window and push me through. I would open up the door and let them in, and they would search through the store for the money, because this was on a Sunday, and they would look for the money that was taken in on a Saturday. This was before night depositories. So the money was always hidden in the same place, in a sugar can, behind some bread. They would search the store, they would find the money. It was always about the same, usually around $100, and they used to give me $10. Now, At the age of 11 years old, and I'm 80 now, that was a lot of money. So I used to take that money and get it in $1 bills, so I had a big roll. Now, my favorite actor was Humphrey Bogart, and there was a movie he was in where there was a bunch of people, and they bought drinks, and he threw a $100 bill across the counter to the bartender and said, "Keep the change." I said, "That's cool." So one day, I remember I'm 11. One day I'm at a baseball game, and after the game, the other team and myself, we all went to a restaurant at Dundas in Washington called New Style, and we bought 18 ice cream cones. 5 cents a piece. It was 90 cents. The guy said it's 90 cents, a nickel each. I pulled out the roll of money that I had about $20 and $1 bills, took a $1 bill, threw it across the counter, and I said, "Keep the change." Somebody noticed it. The next day, I was coming home from a ball game, and a car pulls up, and 2 detectives were in the car. Detectives Tong and Detective Perry. Somebody had told them if they saw me with that roll of money. They said, "Marvin, get in the car." I said, "I'd love to, but I got to go home and do some work, and I got a ball game." They said, "Get in the car." They made me get in the car. They took me to the police station. They said, "Empty your pockets." I emptied my pockets, and I had that money. They said, "Where did you get all this money?" I said, "From my paper routes." They said, "We checked it out. You get 50 cents a week from your paper route, and you give your foster mother half of it. Where did you get the money?" I said, "That's how." Tong gave me a whack across the head.
Oh.
"Where did you get the money?" I repeated the story. Gave me another crack across the head. He said, "Where did you get the money?" This time I started to cry. And I told him what happened, that we were breaking into the story. He says, "Marvin, those grocers make enough money. I'm not going to take this money from you. You can keep this money and keep breaking into stores. I'm giving you the right. But don't tell anybody that I picked you up, because they'll stop taking you along. Keep it between us." I said, "What a great guy. Everybody's got this guy wrong. This is a nice guy." That Sunday, we were in a store on Washington Avenue, and it was a cigar store. The guys were looking through the store. I was sitting down on a shelf reading a Captain Marvel comic book. In come the cops, Tong and Perry and some other police officers. The other 2 guys got scared. I said, "Don't get scared. He's all right." He said, "It's okay. We can do it." So Les Sherwin says to me, "Who said it?" I said, "Detective Tong the other day when he picked me up." "And you told him?" He said, "You stupid little bastard." He tried to get at me. And when we were all arrested, Canadian Jewish Congress got me a lawyer, the name of Oni Brown, the defendant. So I said, "What's going to happen to me, Mr. Brown?" He says, "Well, you're only 11. It's your first offense. I can probably get you off with either only 1 year in reform school or so many strokes with a strap, like 100 strokes with a strap. Wouldn't get him at one time. You go to a little police station so many times, you get so many strokes." He says, "There's only one thing." I said, "What's that?" He says, "If you go to the reform school, even if it's for a day, when you get out, you can't go back to the same foster home." Now, I was being sexually abused in the foster home, and I was scared to say anything. I said to myself, "This is my way out. This is my way out of that foster home. I got to make sure that this judge," the judge's name was Weisberg, So I got to make sure that this guy sends me to the reform school. Now, during our trial, they kept us in the Don jail, not with the adults, by ourselves in the basement. And while we weren't in court, they gave us a basketball to play with, and we played dodgeball. We would throw the ball at each other. And one time the ball hit me in the face, and I got a black eye. I'm in court the next day, and Weisberg looks at me. He says, "What happened to your eye that made you look so ugly?" I says, "Here's my chance." I says, "I was playing dodgeball. What's your excuse?" So now it comes to sentencing. You couldn't go to reform school after 16. They could only send you to reform school after 16. Because after 16, you had to go to an adult institution. So it comes time for sentencing. Weisberg says, "I'm sending the three of them till they're 16. Now, I know I'm 11, so I'm 16 is 5 years. So I said to my lawyer, I said, "Mr. Brown, what's happening?" He said, "You just got sentenced to your 16. I said, "Yeah, but that's 5 years. You said the most I could get is a year." He said, "Yeah, that's before you opened your big mouth."
Wow.
Now, Detective Tong, I don't know if you heard about Tong. I killed a while later by a guy called Steve Suchan, who was a member of the Boyd gang. Tong had a reputation of being the toughest cop in town. He shocked me, stood up, and he said, "Your Honor, that's not right. He's the youngest. He didn't even know what he was doing. He's got the longest term." He says, "No, he didn't. I sent the three of them till they're 16. He says the other two are 14. That means they're only going for 2 years. He's 11. He's only going for 5. So Weisberg says, "Sergeant Tong, when you arrested these boys, were you doing your job?" He goes, "Yes, I was." He goes, "And let me do mine." Now, I didn't go for 5. I went for 4. A female parole officer by the name of Fern Alexander, that a little later became the first female police officer in Ontario. She got me out 1 year early. So instead of serving 5 years, I served 4 and 1 year under her jurisdiction.
He stuck up for you at the end.
That's right.
I think maybe he recognized, obviously, that you were the youngest and that you were, in a lot of ways, just copying what the other boys did.
That's exactly what he did. He stood up for me. He shocked me, but he did. Didn't work, but he tried.
He tried. I'm involved in a few juvenile cases now as a part of my internship, and we would really like if the cops would go to bat for some of the kids. It's just that it's such an uncommon thing. I wish it would happen more. When you were approached by Adrian Humphreys about the book, how did you tell your story, and were you satisfied with the result in the book?
He had one of his secretaries ask me questions and tell the right story, tell how I didn't get along with my stepfather, how he used his connections, make me a ward of children's aid that sent me to a foster home. Now, when I went to the foster home, there was the old lady, her own kids, and 3 other foster. She took in foster kids because she got paid for it. And she used to walk around with a strap in her apron pocket of her apron that she used to use on us. She was very tough. Now, she took a liking to me. This was a Friday. On Monday, due to the fact that I was living in a different area, I had to be taken to the new school to be registered. She told her daughter, Norma, who was going to take me to school, register him under the name of Pasquale. I want everybody to think he's my real son. Register him under the name of Pasquale. And she says to me, "Marvin Pasquale doesn't sound right. We're changing your name to Mario. So while you're here, you are Mario Pasquale." Now, the house was a 3-story. The old man was treated like a dog. He lived in the basement by himself, and it wasn't finished. The old lady lived on the first floor. The kids lived on the second, and then the attic was a bedroom where myself and the other three foster kids lived. We had 2 bunk beds. First night I'm there was a Friday night. Norma comes to the door and she yells, "Mario." I don't know who the hell she's talking to. "Mario." Nobody answers. She says, "Marvin, don't you know your name?" I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." She says, "Mama wants to see you." So she took me by the hand. She took me to the old lady's bedroom. The old lady says to me, "Mario, you are a very bad boy today." I didn't know what I did. She says, "Take off your pajamas and get over my knee." And she spanked me. Not hard, it didn't hurt. Then she made me get into bed with her nude. And I lied on my stomach. And the whole night she kept rubbing it and she said, "You be a good boy now. Mama make it better. You be a good boy. Mama make it better." The next day on a Saturday, I was the poster boy for good behavior for kids anywhere. I was very careful. Same thing happened. So I knew now that this was going to be part of the game. On the Monday as we were going, Roy Pasquale, her oldest son, was a very evil person. He was pure evil and very tough. So we're going, he came along when Norma was taking me to the school. Then he stepped back and he grabbed me by the hair. He said, "Look, I know what's happening with you and my mother. If you tell a teacher or a social worker what's going on, we'll deny it. They'll believe us. You'll stay here. I'll beat the hell out of you every day. You understand? Now what's happening with you and my mother?" I said, "Nothing." So that's what happened till I was there and I got caught and sent to the reform school.
I'm sorry, Marvin, that happened. And I'm sure that back at that time, there was even less insight into that problem than there is today, which is still not a whole lot.
There was none at all.
I am sorry that you had to go through that. I mean, as a child.
It was very tough. I was very scared, but I knew I had to do it. Now,
how long did you endure that until things changed?
Beg your pardon?
How long did you have to go through that before things changed, before you got an out?
I was 9 years old when I went there,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to the reform school when I was 11 for 2 years.
For 2 years. Wow. Again, Marvin, I am sorry. Where you've come since then speaks volume. It spoke volumes before, but with your background, it's obvious that you really overcame some adversity, and I want you to know that I have great respect for that.
Thank you.
Marvin, you have said that you have some insight into Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. Can you describe kind of what that was like for you?
I'll tell you what happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Hoffa was in jail. They were having a convention in Detroit for the elections, and at the same time, they're having the opening of the Renaissance Center, which was a fantastically big building. Today it's a GM building. Now, the slate couldn't pick Mr. Hoffa because he wasn't allowed to run, so they picked McGuigan from Boston to run for president. But Mr. Hoffa could be nominated from the floor. Mr. Hoffa showed up at the convention, and the U.S. Justice Department told the Teamsters, if Hoffa gets nominated from the floor and runs for president and gets elected, we'll give you as much trouble as we can. But if he doesn't get elected, we'll give you cooperation. The Teamsters did not want Mr. Hoffa to run. I met with Mr. Hoffa for a coffee. I told Mr. Hoffa, Mr. Hoffa, the people are very upset about the fact you might be president. It'll give them a lot of trouble. And they'll have no trouble if you're not president. You shouldn't run. His words to me were, "Marvin, my people will never harm me." Now, they had to pour the concrete in the Renaissance Center. They were supposed to pour it in a month. When you pour concrete, you put down wooden slabs, and that's what they pour the concrete into. Every Teamster carpenter that was in Michigan at the time, he could have been working on a high-rise with 200 suites or building somebody's rec room. It didn't matter what. Every carpenter was called off their job to get those slabs down. They poured the concrete 1 month in advance. Concrete is usually poured late. This time they poured it a month in advance, and Mr. Hoffa was never seen again. There's no question in my mind that Mr. Hoffa is in the foundation of the Renaissance Center. People have called, and they've told the FBI that Hoffa is under a driveway or here or there. They would call me, and I would say, "He's not there." They would check, and they found out he wasn't. I know exactly where he is.
To your knowledge, has anybody ever checked? I don't know how they would go about doing that, but has anyone even ever checked?
They've talked about it. They've never done it.
Wow.
I wish they would. It would be very, very good for me, because they would find them. I don't know what they would find there now, but that's where it was put. There's no question in my mind. They poured the concrete 1 month in advance, and they had every carpenter in the state of Michigan come and build those wooden slabs so they could pour the concrete.
I've heard, Marvin, that they have this.
Now, let me tell you what happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Across the road from the Renaissance Center was the Omni Hotel.
Mm.
That's where they held the convention and the elections. My job there was to make sure everybody had their liquor glass filled when it was empty, light their cigars, run errands. When it was all over, they decided to have a change of pace, so they would go across the road to have breakfast the next morning. That was the end of the convention. Now, the Omni and the Renaissance were joined together from the roof. You didn't have to go outside. You could walk along one rooftop and took it to the other hotel. As we're going across from the Omni to the Renaissance Center, before we hit the Renaissance, as soon as we hit the entrance on the roof, Don Beatrix, and at least he turned it around. He says, "Everybody say good morning to Mr. Jimmy Hoffa."
Wow. So that was some direct evidence that that's where Hoffa's buried.
No question about it.
You know, Marvin, I've heard that they have this kind of like the sonar that can detect things, underground, whether it's through concrete or through any kind of material. I've heard that too.
I don't know why they haven't done it.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think it would go a long way. I mean, and honestly, I would wager they don't want to expend resources on old news, but I think it would go a long way just for history.
It could be they've done it and they don't want to say it. I wish it would come out.
Yeah, certainly. Have you seen The Irishman? They made a big deal about, Hoffa's disappearance.
No, I didn't see it. I heard it was a lousy movie.
Yeah, it was 3 hours. It was three hours long. I thought it was above average. I didn't think it was anything breathtaking. It wasn't like Goodfellas, for instance, which I liked. Are you a fan?
Yes.
Yeah, great movie. So I want to ask you, Marvin, you're Jewish, right?
I was born Jewish, and I follow the Jewish religion very heavily today.
What I wanted to ask you about is, what was it like to be Jewish around Teamsters and around members of the mob? I know that you wore a Star of David on your boxing outfit.
I wore a Star of David on my trunks and in the back of my robe.
Did anyone ever give you any trouble for being Jewish?
Nobody gave me trouble because they knew I had powerful friends.
But they might have otherwise.
It's possible. But I never... Now, when I was in prison, the head of the Justice Department was Alan Grossman. He was the politician that was the head of the Justice Department. When he became head of the Justice Department, he made life easier for the inmates. He allowed more television time. He was the first one in Canada that banned the strap for punishment. Everybody else followed. He was the first one that did it. So, being Jewish in prison, I was very popular because the inmates all appreciated it. Everybody knew Alan Grossman was Jewish. The inmates appreciated what he did for them. For my birthday, they made me a birthday party. They had the kitchen make me a cake, and they made a big sign with toilet paper all over the room, and it said, "Happy birthday, Marvin, you Jewish egg."
Could you talk about how, on the religious side of things, with your faith, can you explain what role that's played in your life? I know that when you were in like a near-death experience in the airplane, I know that it must have come to play then. But in general, what is the relationship between you and faith?
Myself and my rabbi are very close. I'm a regular attender. I feel at peace when I'm in the synagogue. I'm a great believer in the above.
Has it brought you a sense of community? Are you, for instance, I'm sure you attend church functions and things like that, and you've met a lot of people through church. Has it brought, I know a lot of people say that it brings them a sense of community as much as it does.
It's brought me a sense of community, a sense of companionship, and a lot of good friends. It's been very important to me. It's a very important part of my life.
That's excellent. So, in regard to Jimmy Hoffa, what would you say was his mistake in the way that he handled things? What could he have done differently to have achieved a different outcome?
He should have realized that the union couldn't let him be president. They were offered too much for him not to be president, and too much if he doesn't. The Justice Department told them they would give them as much peace as possible if he didn't become president. And he feared nothing. He had great belief in himself, and he wanted his union back. He loved his union, and he never believed anything would happen to him.
So you think that it was a sense of invincibility that he had? He wasn't afraid.
It was a sense of invincibility, and the fact that being president meant everything to him. He loved his union. His family and his union were his whole life.
And he just didn't appreciate that the union was offered. The union would be even arguably better off if he wasn't president. That fact didn't make any impression on him.
No, it didn't. He felt that nobody could do the job and be as good for the union members as him. And his words to me were, my people will never harm me."
Do you think that there was a difference between the people at the upper level of the Teamsters who were making a lot of the decisions and the people who were just working jobs, members of the organization because of all the help they got? Do you think there was a division between those two as to how popular Hoffa was?
The Teamsters ran this way. The workers went along with the executive. And the executive told them it's better to vote this way. That's the way they went. So they went along with that. They actually didn't care.
Oh, so Hoffa's popularity was not as rock solid as he thought.
His popularity was not as rock solid. The fact that he had gone to prison changed a lot of it, because he always told his people they would never send them, and they did. So his great strength was not nearly as great as it was at one time.
Well, Marvin, it actually looks like we are 5 minutes till. What I want to do is I want to kind of send this off. Are there any comments that you want to make to kind of close the interview?
I want to say that You're a fantastic interviewer. You made me feel very comfortable. It was very relaxing. I enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you, Marvin. That makes me feel good. And, honestly, I am listening, and I'm here with pen and paper to take down the lessons that you've given me so that I can apply them to my own trajectory as a criminal defense lawyer.
Anytime you need me, you've got my phone number. I'm available to you, Austin, 24/7.